It was a normal Tuesday evening. The lights were on, dinner was being prepared, and the quiet hum of the refrigerator was just another background sound most people never notice. Then everything stopped. The room went silent. The clock on the microwave disappeared. The Wi-Fi router went dark. And for a few seconds, I stood there waiting for everything to come back on like it always had before. But it didn't. That moment is familiar to millions of homeowners. The moment you realize how much of your daily life depends on something you never personally control. And here's the question most people never ask until it's too late. Most people in that situation assume the problem is simple. They think they just need to be more prepared, use less electricity, or find better ways to manage their household costs. But the reality is more complicated. The hidden issue is not always inside the home. It's the growing gap between how homeowners expect the electrical grid to work and how modern energy systems actually behave. For decades, people viewed electricity as one of the most reliable parts of modern life. You flipped a switch, and power was there. You planned your monthly expenses based on a relatively predictable bill. But the environment around that system has changed. Energy demand has increased. Infrastructure has become more complex. Weather events place additional pressure on regional grids, and homeowners are increasingly exposed to changes that happen far beyond their own walls. I call this the energy stability gap, the difference between the reliability people assume they have and the reality of a system that is constantly balancing new pressures. And after looking deeper into how residential energy works, one thing becomes clear. The problem is not that homeowners are failing to adapt. The problem is that most people are trying to optimize a system that is becoming harder to predict. Let me show you what this looks like in everyday life. Imagine a homeowner who has lived in the same house for 10 years. They haven't added major appliances. They haven't changed their routine. They're careful about turning lights off and avoiding unnecessary energy use. Then the monthly bill arrives. It's higher than expected. They look back at their habits. Did we use more electricity? Did something stay running? Did we make a mistake? They start changing small things. They unplug devices. They adjust thermostat settings. They become more conscious about consumption. But the results don't match the effort. And this is where most people make a mistake that costs them months of frustration. They assume the problem is their behavior. They start fighting a battle inside the house when part of the problem exists outside of it. Now consider another situation. A family living in an area where temperatures regularly create periods of high energy demand. During the hottest or coldest weeks of the year, the entire region begins using more electricity at the same time. The home hasn't changed. The family hasn't changed. But the pressure on the system has. And suddenly, the same daily routine creates a different financial result. The part that surprises many homeowners is that they often discover this only after the bill arrives. There was no obvious mistake, no single action they can point to, just a system responding to conditions that were invisible from inside the home. And that creates a frustrating thought. I did everything right, so why did this still happen? Now let's look at the third scenario. A storm moves through the region. Maybe the power goes out for a few hours, maybe longer. At first, it seems like a temporary inconvenience. You wait. You assume service will return quickly. But as time passes, small disruptions begin stacking up. The refrigerator stops maintaining temperature. Internet access disappears. Communication becomes more limited. Normal routines require adjustments. The surprising part is not just losing power. It's realizing how many systems quietly depend on constant electricity. And once that happens, the question changes. It's no longer, how long until the power comes back? It becomes, how dependent is my home on something outside my control? And here's what all three of these situations have in common. A rising bill, an unpredictable energy cost, a sudden outage. They all come back to the same root issue. A household designed around constant grid stability in a world where stability is becoming harder to guarantee. The challenge is not that people don't care. Most homeowners are already doing what they can. They monitor usage. They try to reduce waste. They plan their budgets. But they are working within a framework that gives them very little control over external changes. And that is the part nobody talks about enough. After seeing this pattern repeatedly, I started asking a different question. Instead of asking, how can a homeowner use less energy? I started asking, what would it look like if a home had another layer of stability between itself and the larger grid? That question led me into a different way of thinking about residential energy. Not replacing the grid, not pretending every home can operate completely independently, but creating a buffer, a way to reduce how directly a household feels every fluctuation happening outside its walls. One concept that has gained attention in energy discussions is mechanical energy storage, including systems based on rotational energy principles. The idea is simple. Instead of depending only on immediate energy availability, create a way to store and manage energy so the system can respond more smoothly. For years, these concepts were mainly associated with large-scale industrial applications because the technology required specialized equipment. But as interest in home energy independence has grown, more attention has moved towards simplified approaches designed around accessibility. The principle is what matters. A household does not necessarily need unlimited energy. It needs more predictability. That changes how you think about the problem. For the homeowner dealing with unpredictable costs, the goal becomes reducing exposure to sudden changes. For the homeowner worried about outages, the goal becomes adding another layer of resilience. For the homeowner tired of constantly reacting, the goal becomes creating more control over planning. One example that illustrates this shift is a homeowner who was not looking for complete independence. They were simply tired of unpredictable monthly costs. The biggest improvement was not that every expense disappeared. It was that planning became easier. The household had a better understanding of how their energy system behaved and less uncertainty around unexpected changes. That distinction matters because real solutions are not always about eliminating a problem completely. Sometimes they are about reducing how much that problem controls your decisions. Now, one of the first objections people have is understandable. They think, I'm not an engineer. I don't have a specialized workshop. I don't want something complicated that I can't understand. And that concern is valid. A system that only works for experts is not practical for everyday homeowners. The important shift is focusing less on complexity and more on understanding the principles behind the system. I've seen this with people who started from very different places. One homeowner had limited technical experience and mainly wanted a clearer understanding of how energy systems worked. The biggest benefit was gaining confidence in evaluating different options instead of making decisions based on uncertainty. Another household was focused on reducing dependence on unpredictable conditions. Their goal was not perfection. It was creating a more stable approach that matched their priorities. Different situations, different motivations, but the same underlying lesson. The most valuable part of energy independence is not simply producing more power. It is creating more control over how your home responds. That is why this approach attracts people who are looking for stability rather than unrealistic promises. If nothing changes over the next 6 months, the pattern will probably look familiar. Another bill arrives that is higher than expected. Another season brings another period of increased demand. Another outage reminds you how many parts of modern life depend on electricity being available exactly when you need it. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that happens all at once. Just a gradual increase in uncertainty. But when homeowners begin understanding how these systems work, their decisions become different. They stop looking only at consumption. They start thinking about stability. They start asking better questions about how their homes are designed and what level of dependence makes sense for their situation. And that is an important shift because wanting more control over your home's energy future is not unrealistic. It is simply a response to a system that has become more complicated. You have already been doing the hard part, paying attention, managing costs, trying to make responsible decisions. The missing piece for many people is not effort. It is understanding the options available. Looking back, most homeowners were never ignoring the problem. They were simply working with the information they had. A changing energy landscape requires a different way of thinking about stability, planning, and control. The next step is not about making rush decisions. It is about understanding the systems that affect your home and choosing what level of independence makes sense for you. If you want to see the resource I use to explore these concepts in more detail, I left a link in the description. If this analysis helped you see residential energy differently, consider subscribing and sharing your thoughts in the comments.